Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I present to you a very challenging low-tech project which took me a lot of time to develop. It includes several aspects that few people use in endgame, such as damage hull mods, Manticore and Condor destroyers, and the new ECM rating mechanics. My goal is to make an imposing strike force and take absolute control of the battlefield. For this build, derelict operations will be the most important skill because it allows us to greatly reduce the deployment points of our ships. Having more to deploy also brings its problems, which involves the use of a large amount of story points in addition to an increase in fuel and crews to support the fleet. This build is not recommended for a first playthrough, but rather for those who are already comfortable with the game. There's nothing stopping us from doing all of the game content and farming remnants. The Omega weapons I use are clearly not necessary since the Onslaught's 14 tear apart everything in front of them. The Manticores have two different roles to support our capital ships for both attack and defense, while the Condors apply additional pressure. Now, is it easy to create this fleet? Unfortunately, the answer is no. If you want to do a real low-tech run, you will probably have to buy Eradicators at the very beginning to be able to obtain your capital ships more quickly. I put my Eradicator build in the description below. As for D-mods, it takes a long time to get exactly the right ones since our ships have to be destroyed in a battle and there is no guarantee of getting what we are looking for. If we want to save a lot of time, I recommend installing a utility mod called D-mod Services and going to a planet that has a market size 6 or higher. This way we will be able to select the D-mods we are looking for without having to enter into combat. By the way, this doesn't spoil the vanilla gameplay. I also put the link to download it in the description. Okay, now let's talk about a topic that many players are very emotional about in the Star Sector community: the Onslaught. The one I'm showing you is a hybrid model of armor and shield. By deploying multiple ships at once, it allows our officers to rotate attacks so they can dissipate their flux. Having enough armor facilitates this behavior. We need to understand that they are our main line of defense for other ships, so we need to mitigate the damage as much as possible for long battles. If we want to pay 28 deployment points instead of 40, there are 5 D-mods that I think are better. 3 of them don't impact combat performance except for losing 15 combat readiness in total. That's why we're going to cancel the negative effect by using combat endurance skill instead of impact mitigation. Since Onslaught doesn't have much maneuverability, we won't really feel the difference if we use degraded engines combined with auxiliary thrusters hull mod. Turning slower also allows us to shoot 2 of our Storm Needlers longer on the enemy. Regarding erratic fuel injector, it decreases the top speed, but the effect is completely nullified if we S-mod auxiliary thrusters. For weaponry, the choice is limited since we have a flux dissipation issue. That doesn't mean we can't abuse the new Storm Needler that was buffed in this patch either. It now requires the S-mod expanded magazines to continuously fire impressive bursts of kinetic per second. The short range also makes it possible to adequately manage the soft flux and is excellent for destroying frigates. Another weapon that also benefits from expanded magazines is Thermal Pulse Cannon, a built-in weapon that comes with this ship. With the recoil reduction, we can do very good general damage at long range. In terms of explosive damage, my choice fell on Heavy Mauler. Even if we use 5 of them, the flux cost isn't huge to get an impressive centralized burst damage against armor and hull. Being at 1K range, it also allows us to help other Onslaughts eliminate enemies faster. It may seem strange to not put any missiles in this loadout, but our destroyers already have some to support us. Since we are squeezed everywhere, it is better to favor capacitors. For defense, the series of Vulcan cannons towards the front of the capital ship are sufficient to counter missiles and fighters. Adding more efficient point defenses will increase the cost of soft flux, something we don't necessarily want. As for the sides, the Manticores play a key role in the fleet as they have canister flak. Basically, it's an ability that destroys missiles and fighters around it while avoiding friendly fire. Since they escort our Onslaughts, the two can make a good combination. Even being versatile, it still generates a lot of soft flux. For skills, I recommend using Elite Target Analysis instead of Field Modulation since it is more useful to be able to deactivate the enemy's weapons and engines than to rarely have the ability to dissipate when using a shield. But it is still an option. My first model is meant to help the offensive line, so we're going to have 4 of them. The D-mods used are similar to the ones from the Onslaught from earlier, and it's not necessary to use all of them. so we have a choice even if Escort Package Hull Mod removes the negative effects of degraded engines. The main weapon is the Gauss Cannon, which already has a very long range to which we add bonuses to make it even more impressive. It fits very well with our capital ships since they lack long-range kinetics. Note that the overload lasts a number of seconds depending on the damage dealt by the last hit and hull size. Since Gauss does high damage per hit, we increase the chance of this happening for around 10 seconds. In short, that gives us enough time to do significant hull damage. But the only problem we have is the turn rate of the weapon since the ship moves too quickly. We can, however, improve its performance by using Advanced Turret Gyros Hull Mod. Because there isn't much flux dissipation left, we take the light autocannon to keep some pressure on the enemy's shield. It doesn't do much damage, but it's cheap to use and has a long range. For missiles, the Salamander MRM pod is there to stop ships from backing up when our fleet is destroying everything. If we want the ECCM package to improve the chance to hit, we can also downgrade by using 2 small Salamanders MRM, but personally I won't do that. Now, as for the second model, which is intended for defense, we need 2 of them. Here, we choose the armament in order to decimate frigates and destroyers. For small ballistics, the railgun is actually the improved version of the autocannon with more damage per second. It's expensive to use, but it's great when we have several. In the large ballistic category, we will rather take this time an explosive weapon that also fires continuous bursts of damage, the Hephaestus Assault Gun. Just like the railgun, its bullets are very accurate and go at almost the same speed. In my opinion, this addition gives added value to the fleet, especially to our onslaughts. The damage per hit is not surprising, which means we have to take a little more time to break through the armor, but it's enough to do good hull damage. All our weapons being at 900 range before the bonuses, a steady officer still manages the use of weapons quite well to not generate too much soft flux. On the battlefield, the Manticore's Hephaestus model is used to hold certain objectives, but we also have some help from the Ludic Pathlasher. Since it has a lot of top speed through safety overrides, this little frigate will continually harass enemy ships that also want to flank our fleet. Instead of using Gorgon-type missiles like in my previous build, we focus more on its ballistics this time with accelerated ammo feeder. In this setup, it's important to have an aggressive officer to be able to effectively use this ship, as safety overrides drastically decreases the range of weapons that have more than 450. Elite Point Defense skill is highly recommended since it maximizes the range of our machine guns. We still have the choice to make one of the following 2 skills elite, either Target Analysis to do more damage or Ballistic Mastery to facilitate the chances of hitting the enemies. First, let's start with the Light Dual Machine Gun, which allows us to do an impressive pressure of kinetic damage on the shield in addition to its very low flux cost. With the hardpoints in front, this allows us to centralize our attacks towards the shield instead of missiles or fighters, which makes the weapon even more destructive with its system ability. When we are in close combat, adding ECCM package Hull Mod to Salamander's MRM means that our missiles are sometimes unavoidable. By taking Elite Target Analysis, it only takes one to completely destabilize the target. Finally, our main choice for dealing explosive damage is the Light Assault Gun. Since its bullets are fast, we have no problem hitting the enemy and even doing good hull damage. Compared to the light mortar, this weapon is in my opinion the best to counter frigates and destroyers. Even though the Lasher was built to be ruthless in combat, the fact remains that his defense sometimes works against it. That's why in certain situations, fighters can take on a completely unique role in helping our ships in need. Unfortunately, not all of them can do this adequately. Before we go any further, why are we taking the Condor? Well, it's the cheapest way to acquire 2 hangar bays, and it also has access to a medium missile launcher. Even if it's fragile, we are not going to put up any defenses but rather devote all our points to support. It is rare to take damage since we have other ships which come to protect it. All that matters is that it works. The behavior of the officer plays a key role here since a steady allows our fighters to do both offense and defense. If we take a cautious, for example, they tend to be more defensive by protecting our ships in need. The opposite is also true for an aggressive who attacks continuously. Our fleet being balanced, we are better off allowing the AI to adapt its interventions according to the situation. For this model, skills are also quite important. For the elite ones, missile specialization gives us a good boost on the regeneration rate. Point defense allows us to drastically improve our fighters with a bonus in damage and range for the PD. And finally, gunnery implants increases the ECM rating for each deployed Condor. Basically, the ECM rating reduces the enemy's weapon range, including missiles. In the current patch, it's now interesting to invest a few percentages. Here is how it works. Both sides can have a penalty at the same time, and it's capped to a maximum of 10%. After being capped, the penalty is reduced by the ratio of enemy and player ECM rating. For example, if both sides have the same numbers, each side's penalty is reduced by 50%. Currently with this build, we have 42% ECM rating with no objectives taken and without drawback, which is definitely enough for all the content in the game. At a cost of 7 deployment points instead of 10, this is another fact that makes the Condor so powerful. Speaking of demods, we have a lot of choices and it remains at our discretion. In my opinion, there are 3 that are to be favored, one of which is mandatory. Malfunctioning comms. I'll come back to this in a few moments. Otherwise, damaged weapon mounts and glitch sensor array have weapon penalties that have no impact on the medium missile, which gives us 2 free demods. Now, why do we choose Thunders and not other fighters? First, we need to understand how the enemy AI behaves with EMP. When the ship takes too much of this kind of damage, it retreats to dissipate its flux and wait for its armament to return to normal. Overall, it is another way to prevent our fleet from the strong pressure coming from enemy attacks. Low-Tech doesn't have many options for EMP, and I wanted to have some. So the idea came to me to take fighters, which is not a bad thing to compensate for the lack of mobility of low-tech ships. In terms of choice, we only have Longbow, Claw, Thunder, and Xiphos. When carriers want to protect one of our ships that is quite far away, the Longbow and the Claw must be supported to be effective and are not very fast, while the Xiphos has no engagement range. On the other hand, the Thunder has several interesting aspects such as its diversified weapons, including a Swarmer SRM launcher, a light dual machine gun, and an ion cannon for the EMP. Its top speed can also allow it to avoid enemy PD in certain situations and even save us a skill point in the talent tree. Because it's an interceptor, it can also be very good against fighters and small frigates. When we use several wings at the same time, they synergize very well together. On the downside, it is very fragile and its damage is not high, but that is not something that matters to us here. It also has the highest engagement range at 6,000, which is quite annoying since we want to use them in close support with our fleet. This is why we need to have the malfunctioning comms demod to reduce the engagement range by 40%, making it perfect at just under 4,000. Another point to note when using a carrier is the fighter replacement rate. To maintain a high percentage, expanded deck crew hull mod is essential to continue to produce or rearm fighters. If we use Thunders in both bays, it's very common that the percentage remains above 80%. This way, it's not necessary to use carrier group skill in the talent tree. In weaponry, we have a few choices of missiles that regenerate over time, such as Salamander, Pilum, and Resonator. For this loadout, I choose the Resonator for its impressive kinetic damage, which is equivalent to 3 squalls if we use 6. The excellent alternative that I highly recommend is the Pilum LRM launcher to make even more EMP. To increase the effect, don't forget to take Elite Target Analysis. With the remaining points, we can definitely take recovery shuttles to reduce crew losses. For small ballistics, there is no problem leaving them empty or using mining lasers. Having covered the combat ships, let's talk about the civilian ones. Because we have major problems with fuel consumption and the crew required, it is imperative to minimize the impact with them, such as adding the SMOD efficiency overhaul. For the practical side, solar shielding hull mod is also used to reduce repairs when we are in hyperspace. We must also not forget to have surveying equipment hull mod with at least 2 capital ships, like the Atlas, to reduce costs during our explorations. In order to improve the sensors, we use high-resolution sensors and insulated engine assembly. Note that we must have at least 3 Prometheuses and 2 Starliners for this build, as well as 4 Oxen to maximize the burn level. Compared to what it takes to operate this fleet, the skill tree is fairly standard. As usual, we take navigation and bulk transport. Then we are going to put our points in industry, leadership, and finally technology. Since we're looking to have the last tier skills and maximize our destroyers, it's impossible for us to use carrier group and fighter uplink. Having 18 combat ships also means recruiting 10 mercenaries, which is why it's important not to use best of the best at the very beginning but officer management skill. Once we get 2 officers at level 6, with the right behavior and skills, we will be able to put them as mercenaries. For your information, it's better to use mercenaries for Condors and Lasher since they have the least impact. The question you're probably asking is, how should we position our ships in combat? Instead of answering with multiple strategies, here's one that is universal. We will first deploy the Lasher and Hephaestus Manticores to capture objectives. The second wave will be the Onslaughts, which we will put in a straight line. Starting from the center of the formation, we will put 2 on each side with a distance of 3 squares, and the others will be placed halfway. By doing this, the capital ships will protect each other and the enemy will not be able to make a breach. For the third wave, we will take the Gauss Manticores and place them between the Onslaughts, about 1 square below them. This will provide us with excellent support without harming other ships. When we have enough deployment points, we will put 3 Condors on each side. Our carriers have the least peak performance time, but the Thunders have a good attack range. It's normal that they are only deployed at the very end. The Manticores of the first wave will be replaced 1 square below the Onslaughts on each end, and the Lasher will be in backup at the back to support our flanks. It's important to understand that you should not advance too much from the first minute, but rather gradually move upwards when there is a break in the firefights. If we need to move the formation, redirect the Onslaughts first, then the other ships after a few seconds of delay. Keep in mind that this is a defensive-focused build and our Onslaughts are not mobile. The key to success here is to be patient when reaching the top of the map. And with that, I've covered just about everything. Please let me know what you think about this low-tech project, or even submit your ideas for the next video. If you enjoyed the guide, consider throwing a like and subbing to the channel for more content like this. As always, thank you for your support and see you guys in the next one.
For revolution!